Congresswoman Liz Cheney is now out, but she isn't going quietly. In remarks after a voice vote to remove her, Cheney defended herself. And in a dramatic speech overnight, Cheney said she won't be silent in the face of what she sees as a threat to the nation's democracy. Now it marks a remarkable shift. In February, Cheney won her leadership status easily, but today the votes against her were overwhelming. Sources tell us the voice vote was quick and Cheney did not challenge it. A source in the room says Cheney walked up the center aisle of the auditorium straight through the group that had just voted her out. It is a pivotal moment for Cheney and for the Republican Party. Congresswoman Liz Cheney now officially ousted from her leadership position.
Yeah, I think that the party is in a place that we've got to bring it back from. We cannot be dragged backward by the very dangerous lies of a former president.
Removed with a voice vote by her Republican colleagues this morning after she condemned former President Trump's falsehoods about the 2020 election and voted to impeach him for inciting the January 6th Capitol riot. Last night, Cheney issuing a stern warning on the House floor with this scathing message for her Republican colleagues who continue to back Mr. Trump in their efforts to win back the House.
Remaining silent and ignoring the lie emboldens the liar. I will not participate in that.
Cheney's support has collapsed in recent days, with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy endorsing Trump loyalist New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik to replace Cheney.
When you're a leader and people lose confidence in you, you can be fired, and that's what's going to happen tomorrow.
But some Republicans still defending Cheney's right to voice her opinion.
I believe if we need to express something, we should feel free to express it.
Cheney casting her fight as a battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party and the nation.
We must love America so much that we will never yield in her defense. That is our duty. Thank you.
You're watching the Armwood Opinion channel here on YouTube, and today we're continuing our conversation about America and its slide toward fascism. And we're seeing it very clearly in the move of the Republican Party to deny what happened on January 6th when the Capitol was stormed. You've heard Republican congressmen in Congress testifying and lying about what happened, claiming that it was just a peaceful day and there were visitors at the Capitol. You've seen the third leading member of the Republican Party in the House of Representatives lose her position. And this was a prominent Republican, Liz Cheney, daughter of the former vice president under Bush. An arch conservative, right-wing, many of us would call wingnut. But she refused to go along with the obeisance to Donald Trump that other Republicans are going through. And the minority leader in the House of Representatives, Congressman McCarthy, who had condemned Trump on January 6th, went down to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, met with Trump, and bowed the knee to him, and has since gone along with Trump and has been supporting him. In the Senate side, Mitch McConnell, I like to call Turtle Man, he has moved the same direction. On January 6th and immediately after, he condemned Trump for his instigation of the riot and insurrection at the Capitol, and later has moved away from it. And he did it pretty quickly. He voted against removing Trump from office during the second impeachment. Remember, this is American history. We've had a president who was impeached twice. The only time in American history this has ever happened, it was Trump. Trump has always been a fascist. He has advocated it all of his life. Those of us who have followed him since his days in New York, that grew up in New York, know about him. He engaged in racial discrimination in housing with his father and was brought by Nixon's Justice Department into court, where they entered a settlement agreement because of their racial discrimination in housing against blacks and Puerto Ricans, where they literally put C next to black applicants for colored and P next to Puerto Ricans and denied them housing, denied them rental apartments. This is Trump. His father was an American firster. What is America first? Go back to 1915. President Wilson, who many of us who went to school in the 60s heard praised in school. But Wilson led demonstrations and instigated demonstrations against immigrants who were coming over from Europe, particularly Catholic immigrants. Remember, Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump, was arrested at a Ku Klux Klan rally in 1927. You can just Google Fred Trump and KKK and it'll come up. The America First movement was a movement that started 1915 as an anti-immigrant program. No wonder when Trump announced his run for president, he came down the escalator with his wife, attacking Mexican immigrants. This is who Trump and his family have always been. Trump is a Mussolini-type figure, and now his cult of personality has taken over the Republican Party, even though he lost the election. And some of you may wonder, well, why would a loser, a one-term president, be so popular among a certain group of Republicans that have basically taken over the party? The question is simple. The question is straightforward. The answer is simple. The answer is straightforward. What we're talking about is a movement, a fascist movement, based upon the fear that many Americans feel about the demographic change going on in this country. What do I mean by that? Break it down in simple language. The country is becoming less white. White folks are going to be a minority in this country by 2045. That's why this fear of people at the border is there. That's what it's about. It's about fear of being a minority status. Hispanics are the largest minority in this country. Next to that, African Americans. Remember that there's a long history. Just to pick those groups. When we have Asians, we have indigenous Americans. Most of the indigenous Americans were killed. We know the American immigrants committed genocide against them. The first few centuries that Europeans came here, from the 1600s through the 1900s, really into the 20th century, they committed genocide. And you could argue that some of it is still going on. My point being that this white-dominant fascism has been a constant in American history. We're taught that American history was a democracy. Okay, let's look at that. America was founded 1789. That's when the Constitution was adopted. The Revolution was 1776. The Constitution was adopted in 1789. America was not a democracy. It was a slave-holding state from 1789 until 1865. That's not a democracy. White males with property were allowed to vote under the Constitution. Poor whites couldn't vote. Indigenous Americans couldn't vote. African Americans couldn't vote. And Hispanics were not considered Americans. Mexicans were largely indigenous Americans that were here. The territory from Texas all the way to California was stolen from Mexico by warfare. First Texas, which broke away from Mexico after people moved south from the United States and colonized it. Then they fought a war. That's what the whole silly thing about the Alamo is about. Those were bad people in the Alamo. No, those people who died were not good people. They were evil people. They were thieves. They were stealing land from Mexico. Then later on in 1844, President Polk started the war with Mexico so he could steal the land all the way to California. They wanted the harbors of San Diego and San Francisco. That's what Manifest Destiny was about. I mean, this was the plan from the beginning. Go back to the Monroe Doctrine. When was it, 1807? I mean, telling Europe to stay out of this world. This was the United States' domain. This is what it was about. Black people in this country, African Americans, were ostensibly given the right to vote after the Civil War of 1870 with the 15th Amendment, but that only lasted a few years, because after the Tilden Hayes election and the compromise that Rutherford B. Hayes, that allowed Rutherford B. Hayes to become president, Jim Crow came into effect, the Ku Klux Klan was formed, and black people were not allowed to vote. The Voting Rights Act, which gave blacks in the South the right to vote, did not come about till 1965. I was 12 years old. So black people could not vote. America has not been a democracy most of its history. What they teach you in school is a lie. It's mythology. It's never been land of the free and home of the brave. It's been an oppressive state. And the Republican Party is trying to return there. That's what Brian Kemp, who stole the gubernatorial race from Stacey Abrams in 2018, that's what he and his Republican Party did with Georgia, with the legislation that was recently passed, limiting voting days, limiting drop boxes, in fact, cutting out drop boxes, limiting voting hours. That's what they're trying to do. Limiting people passing out water while you're waiting for vote. In places like Fulton County, where the city of Atlanta is, the largest county in the state, people waited 10 to 11 hours in predominantly black neighborhoods. They're trying to squash the vote. DeSantis, the governor in Florida, recently signed a similar bill. Another bill is moving through the state legislature in Texas. They are over 70 bills going through legislatures in the United States right now. There's one organization who has been helping to write these bills for these Republican legislatures to try to suppress the vote. We've been through this before. This is what Jim Crow was about. Don't believe those people who tell you this is not Jim Crow. This is exactly what Jim Crow is about. Study the history if you don't believe me. This is the history. This is how it happened. My family's been in this country since the 1600s. We've been through this. We know this. My ancestors fought this. So we've seen this happen. The police killings that are on video, this is the modern day lynchings. Remember, the police forces in the South in this country were formed originally as slave-catching organizations. In a lot of the northern cities, they were largely formed by employers with the help of some female Christian organizations to stop a lot of the particularly poor Irish men from, drinking and coming home and beating their wives. This is history. Read Joan Walsh's book. She talks about that. So my point to you guys is that what is happening now is as American as apple pie. It's happened before, and it's happening again. The only way we can stop it is to organize in each state, register people to vote, and make sure you vote in elections, protest, support Black Lives Matter, support your local representatives who are willing to stand up and fight against these Republicans. Republicans are our enemy. Our enemy is not overseas. It never has been. Our enemy is here in America. Republicans are our enemy. And some Democrats are, like Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, who's nothing but an old-fashioned Dixiecrat. Remember, it's not the political party that counts, it's the political philosophy. The Democrats at one time were the party of segregation in the South. It switched after the Goldwater election in '64 to become the Republican Party between '64 and '68 once Nixon came in power. And the liberals were basically purged out of the Republican Party. And it's been when Reagan moved it to even dramatically further to the right. He ran on a states' rights, which is another term for pro-slavery during the 1840s and pro-segregation during the 1950s and 1960s line. And this is what Joe Manchin is using as a justification for opposing the new voting rights bill, Senate Bill 1. This is not new. We have to organize. We can't let this happen again. Resistance is not futile. We must resist. We must win. We owe this to our ancestors. We owe this to our children and grandchildren. My parents couldn't vote until they were in their 30s. My grandparents could never vote. This is America, and we must fight to make it a better country. When improvements have come in this country, we have been the driving force in almost all of those improvements. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the 1965 Open Housing Act, and the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Reform Act were parts of our civil rights movement. So we have to continue the fight. Remember, resistance is not futile. We can and will win if we do the work. Have a good day. Hit the like button if you like this video. Subscribe to this channel if you want to see more political content. Look at some of my other videos. I have 120 some videos up on this channel talking about political issues and political history in this country. So have a good day, and I'll see you in the next video.